This episode of the Folsom History Show takes us to Pioneer Village, a gem of local history. Experience a blast from the past in this real-life recreation of a pioneer town from the 1850s. We're here with an expert of Folsom history to learn more about this interesting attraction.
Hi, I'm Jerry Schroeder. I'm a docent with the Folsom Historical Society here at Pioneer Village, and this is a place that I enjoy and have a lot of fun, and I hope everybody else does as much as I do. So let me look here and point out that this is placer mining, running water through a sluice box with riffles in it, and as the water would wash the gravel through the gold, being heavy, would fall down and get behind the riffles. And at the end of the day, you'd scoop out the riffles and there's your gold. But now let's suppose you're a miner and you've got a sluice box, and there's as long tom as a second sluice box, so you can get more gravel in there in the same water. You got to dig the dirt out of the river, because the dirt's down in the river is what the river dropped the gold in there, and that's what you're getting. You get that into your sluice box. So that's just the first part of the problem. Now you've got to get water out of the river into that sluice box to wash the water. Water is cold, water is wet, and water is heavy. None of those things make it fun. And it's hard. You got to lift that water. So there's two guys in about 1850 that just failed miserably and hated it. And I can understand why they hated it. So they went up here to Salmon Falls, about 11 miles, and they put a stick down there and said, "This water is ours," and they dug a ditch. They're the first claim on the water, and that's their water. And their water, to this day, they had the first claim. So they brought it down in the canal. Then they have this little box, and you'll notice that there's a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of water that comes out of there. That's called a miner's inch. They sold that amount of water, about 17,000 gallons a day, to the miners. They sold it for $4 a day in 1850, 51. That's $90 a day per inch in today's dollar, and most miners use 2 inches. They're spending $180 a day for water just to find out if they've got gold in that dirt. The one thing California has is moving rivers, and that gives you water you put a water wheel on that and you have instant power. Then you hook a belt up to that, to a motor, and yeah, they had motors then. Or they could just drive belt-driven system. That was water power, and that's what you had. And so we've got one here, there. Another thing that we've got over here is we got a hard rock mining exhibit. A little further up, they started chasing that gold down into the ground. Yep. And now this was a whole new kind of mining, because you got a pick and your chisels, and you're blasting the rock away and going straight and following that vein into the ground. This is a large rock crusher. It's made by Hendry out of San Francisco. Massive piece of steel. These are flywheels. They are not wheels to run on the road. Once they get it turned, they got enough weight to turn. And there's a belt system over here. You hook up with a belt to a motor like this, and it turns this. And once it gets turning it, this jaw goes back and forth. You put a rock in here and it comes out at the bottom as powder. And then they could take and sluice the gold right out of there. This is a early engine. This was a radiator. Fill this full of water. Put some gas in there. Got a magneto inside of here. And it runs today. All right, this is a water cannon. You think of most of these things used at Malakoff diggings and Gold Run. They would wipe away whole hillsides, mountains. But this cannon was used all the way through the canyon here in Folsom. If you look, all those bare rocks in there weren't natural. They were originally had a lot of dirt on them, and they washed them away with this cannon. As you got the creek coming over the mountain, and has been diverted and comes into a funnel. Comes down into here, and that's the amount of water that gets diverted and becomes very powerful in just that vertical drop. There was a second gold rush in Folsom, and that was the Dredger Gold Rush. It started in 1895 and went through 1962. That's a long time. Basically, they put a dredge in the river, and they dug out on one side and left mine tailings on the other. And this is a picture of what the mine tailings look like. What this barge did is that it went down as deep as 110 feet. Mostly 60, 70 feet until they got to bedrock, but some of it got down pretty deep. This is a picture showing the business end of a barge, the dredger. These are the bucket lines, and you can see these are the chains, and we have the chains over here. These chains were enormous pieces of steel, and they were all made here in Folsom at the Natomas Company, cast in their forges. Well, this is a miner's cabin, and it's a fascinating building. You know, I'm not sure how much time they had to sit out on the porch. Probably at the end of the day is about it, but they were busy other than that. But this cabin was built, originally these roofs would fold down, and the building is on skids, and they would move it from claim to claim, but they had a place to live, out of the shelter, out of the weather and this sort of thing. It's a fascinating old building. I understand they found it out in the field and then reconstructed it, but it's just a sample what the early miner would build and how he lived. Come on in the miner's cabin. This is what it looked like to live in here. I want you to see the stove that serves to cook your stuff. It also heats the place in the winter, heats the place in the summer as well. So maybe you cook outside, I don't know. The dining room, somewhere in the middle of the floor is the living room. You know, we have all of these different amenities. You notice that the kitchen sink, everything but the kitchen sink in here. And that's because there's no plumbing in here, so they brought that from the well outside, and they brought their water in buckets. But I want to show you something that I consider really special, in that this is the bed, and on this bed is a mattress. And this mattress is filled with goose down feathers. It was brought west in a wagon train by this woman in about 1860. Again, it's filled with goose down feathers, a very soft mattress. Her granddaughter gave it to the museum and told us the story that when she was a child, she would go visit and stay overnight with Grandma, and she and her sister would always fight over who got to sleep on the famous mattress, which I think is just kids. It's beautiful. This is for the baby. Rock the baby. This is a 1904 washing machine. And I want you to call particular attention to the logo on the bottom. It says, "I am for women." You know, you can't get away with that today, but in 1904, that's the truth, and that's how you sold this thing.
What an interesting perspective of life back then. Make sure to visit Jerry at Pioneer Village the next time you pass through Old Folsom. Thanks for watching the Folsom History Show.